This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross.
So, come up to the lab and see what's on the slab. I see you shiver with anticipation.
Well, on the slab today, we have Tim Curry. We just heard him playing that sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania, Dr. Frankenfurter, in a scene from the horror film spoof The Rocky Horror Picture Show. Curry originated the role of Frankenfurter in the 1973 London production, then starred in the 1975 film, which became an international phenomenon. In America, there were midnight screenings for years. Audiences came dressed like the characters and recited the lines along with them. Where do you go after making your screen debut in a corset and fishnet stockings? Well, Curry continued his stage career in London and New York and has appeared in many films, most recently Kinsey and Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. Thursday night, he opens on Broadway in the Monty Python musical Spamalot, based on the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Curry plays King Arthur. The show is written by former Python Eric Idle, is directed by Mike Nichols, and also stars Hank Azaria and David Hyde Pierce. Let's hear a song from the forthcoming cast recording. This is a self-help spoof called Find Your Grail, featuring Curry and Sarah Ramirez.
Find your grail, find your grail.
When your life seems to drift, when we all need a lift, trim your sail, you won't fail. Find your grail, find your grail. Life is really up to you. You must choose what to pursue. Set your mind on what you find.
And there's nothing you can do. You can do.
So keep on to the end.
That's music from the new Broadway musical Spamalot. Tim Curry, welcome to Fresh Air. How did you get the part of King Arthur in Spamalot?
Sort of sideways, really, I guess. I've known Eric Idle a long time, one of the original Pythons, and he now lives in Los Angeles, as do I. And so we see each other quite a bit. And in fact, the summer before last, we were hoping to do a film together, which he had written and was going to direct, which was a kind of demolition of every Miramax movie ever made, called The Remains of the Piano. And that never quite happened because the money... It's a good title, isn't it?
Very good, very good.
I was going to play the Reverend Whoopsie. And Robin Williams was going to play Vanessa Redgrave in Howard's End. I loved his lines, which were stuff like, You, I haven't met you before. You shall have the teacup when I go. No, you shall have the grand piano. Oh, no, you shall have the house. So that never happened, but he said, I think it looks like we are finally going to get to do the musical version of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and we're going to call it Spamalot. And first of all, I thought that was just terribly funny. But I also thought, oh, well, I'll believe it when it happens. And then suddenly Mike Nichols was directing it, and they put David Hyde Pierce and Hank Azaria and I and a couple of other people on a plane from California, and we came into New York, and we sat down and read it with a bunch of other people from New York, some of whom are in the play. And it just went like gangbusters, and I guess the next day I was going to be King Arthur.
So Spamalot incorporates some classic Monty Python bits in it. that I assume a lot of people in the audience probably know by heart. What kind of response do you get when you get to the classic parts?
It's quite interesting because the audience always sort of contains some core of Monty Python fans who see stuff coming, you know, and react with great whoops of joy, and then settle down to see it unfold. I mean, they're hugely welcoming, and then they really want to see it happen. I mean, happily, they're not talking along with it, because that would, you know, that would need a spanking. But but they love it, and they see it coming, and they are thrilled to see characters and sketches that they recognize.
You knew the Monty Python material, and the audience
Yes.
knows a lot of the Monty Python material. But
Yes.
do you know a lot of the early Nichols and May sketches?
I do. I was always a fan, and so it was sort of very interesting for me to work with him. And he has first of all, every note that you ever get from Mike is preceded by, "That was wonderful. That was wonderful. One small thing." So you're given this enormous sort of sense of entitlement, and then something tiny and completely accurate is lodged like a little sort of Navajo arrow in your brain. And what his great note, I think, because I was playing it pretty broadly at the beginning, because so much of it is like something that we in England called pantomime, and sort of is part of vaudeville, really. And his first note and recurring note to me is, "Yes, that's great. It's, you know, it's very funny. Now let's make it true." And I think that's his great gift to this material, is that he's given it a great big sort of beating Arthurian heart. And that's an extra dimension that you just sort of don't expect. And of course also makes it so much more interesting to play.
You're in the middle of the previews process now on Broadway, and Spamalot officially opens on March 17th. So you know, you're still testing things. Does it feel like you're in front of a focus group every night, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't?
That's a great question, actually. It was much more like that in Chicago. We played for 5 weeks in Chicago, and we did quite a lot of tweaking in Chicago. It was sort of interesting because we left for Chicago 2 days after Thanksgiving. We left on Thanksgiving Day. Eric sort of rewrote Act 2. It's the most extraordinary story. He completely restructured it and did an enormous amount of rewriting, while everyone else was stuffing their faces with turkey. He rewrote Act 2, and we did it. We rehearsed it on Friday, and we performed it for backers on Saturday, and got on a plane on Sunday, and, you know, went into technical rehearsals in Chicago. And it was the most dazzling rewrite I think I've ever seen, because it just, and a lot of it, of course, had to do with, you know, Mike's restructuring advice. But then in Chicago, you know, we did quite a bit of tweaking, mostly of choreography, but some dialogue too. But really, once we got to New York, we haven't tweaked it much at all.
My guest is Tim Curry. He's now starring in the new Monty Python musical Spamalot. It opens on Broadway Thursday. We'll talk more after a break. This is Fresh Air.
Science fiction, double feature, Dr. X will build a creature, see androids fighting.
My guest is Tim Curry. He plays King Arthur in the new Monty Python Broadway musical Spamalot. Curry first became famous for his starring role in the 1975 cult classic The Rocky Horror Picture Show as Dr. Frankenfurter, a mad scientist and transvestite from transsexual Transylvania. Here he is welcoming two naive strangers, played by Susan Sarandon and Barry Bostwick.
Magenta. Columbia. Go and assist Riff-Raff. I will entertain...
Brad Majors. This is my fiancée, Janet Weiss.
Weiss.
Weiss?
Enchanté. Well, nice. And what charming underclothes you both have. But here, put these on. They'll make you feel less vulnerable. It's not often we receive visitors here, let alone offer them hospitality.
Hospitality? All we wanted to do was to use your telephone. Damn it, a reasonable request, which you've chosen to ignore.
Dad, don't be ungrateful.
Ungrateful?
How forceful you are, Brad. Such a perfect specimen of manhood. So dominant.
You know, like so many other of your fans, I first saw you in the Rocky Horror Picture Show in the 70s. And when you see somebody in a movie for the first time, it's sometimes hard to tell how good they are. You don't know, is this all they can do? Do they do other things too? Is this what they're really like? Or, you know, how much are they acting? And so I saw you, I guess it was probably like the late 80s, in Wise Guy, the TV series.
Yes.
And you played a kind of Phil Spector-ish, brilliant but crazy record producer.
That's right.
And a great, really terrific performance. And that's I think that's when I really got the picture. Wow, he's really good at doing all kinds of things. So,
That's so nice. I mean, it's sort of important for me because, you know, that first performance that sort of introduced me to everybody was so out there and so
I'll say, yeah.
so kind of outrageous that, you know, I was a very quiet boy for a while, you know, just to make sure that people got it, that, you know, that wasn't necessarily who I was.
Was that
It
because
was
of
my first movie, you know.
that was your first movie?
Yeah.
How did you get the part?
I got the part because I used to work a great deal at a theatre in London called the Royal Court. And I guess they have a little theatre upstairs which seats about 60 people, and I did Brecht there, and I did a sort of Rudyard Kipling show there, and I guess the next show, I did a dreadful musical, a Marxist musical called Give the Gaffers Time to Love You, with a director who kept saying, Barry, the second act just simply isn't Marxist enough. And that, of course, never even opened to the critics. But the next show coming in was this other musical called The Rocky Horror Show. And originally I played Frankenfurter as though he was German. He was Dr. Frankenfurter, and everything was very interesting and stupid. And then one day I heard a woman on a bus saying, do you have a house in town or a house in the country? And I thought, yes, she should sound like the Queen. So he should sound like the Queen. So, but that's how it happened, and it just started in this tiny theatre, you know, and it just took off like a sort of rocket.
Did you like the kind of cheap horror films that it in part parodied?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean it. Richard's brilliance really was just, you know, it was really like reaching up a hand into the zeitgeist and just grabbing, you know, horror 50s horror movies, Sandra Dee, comic books, and 50s rock and roll, and just hurling them all together. With the, you know, some fishnet tights thrown in. And the fishnet tights really, you know, came from a brilliant costume designer called Sue Blaine, who I'd worked with before, actually, in a wonderful theatre in Scotland called the Glasgow Citizens Theatre, where we did a production of The Maids, where I wore exactly that corset.
The
which we
Jean
bought
Genet
for
play?
Yeah, the Jean Genet play. I played Solange, and we bought the corset for £3 off a barrow in the market in Glasgow and wore it back to front.
That's funny. You'd be wearing it for like this transgressive playwright Genet, and then this
Yeah,
kind of parody
well,
of everything,
absolutely.
Rocky Horror.
Absolutely.
Well, there's probably nothing that can get you into character quickly, like black bikini briefs, fishnet stockings, the garter belt, the corset, the whole whole thing.
Well, absolutely. But that was a fairly late development. I mean, I had no idea it was going to be like that.
You
until,
didn't when you
know.
accepted the part?
No. I thought I'd be in a white lab coat, you know.
So how did the
so it was
whole
a bit
thing?
of a shock,
How did it
actually.
all evolve then?
Well, it evolved because it was much funnier that way. And I mean, I thought the great gag about, the way that we all looked was, and I've always said this to anybody who's ever asked me about playing Frankenfurter, if they were playing it, you know, to just never think about it as drag, because it's not. It's just what people wear in Transylvania. It's just what everybody wears in Transylvania, so just get over it, you know. It's truck driver drag. It's not about going boop boop a doob. It's just what they happen to wear.
I think the thing I found most amazing about the whole phenomenon of Rocky Horror was watching like the 12-year-olds outside the theater parading around in their transvestite clothes because they were all it was just like all these 12-year-olds outside the theater imitating you in your getup, and you had to just kind of ask yourself, what is going on here? What do the 12-year-olds make of it? I mean, are they going through some kind of gender thing, or do they just love the movie? Like, what is this about?
I think it's all of the above, actually. I mean, I think, first of all, they love the movie because it's daring. To pretty much everybody, it was daring at the time, less daring now. To them, it's daring, and it's also, I think, you know, there are several reasons why it's endured the way that it has. It's a kind of rite of passage now, I think, and actually, first of all, it's a guaranteed weekend party to which you can go with or without a date, and probably find one if you don't have one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, I think, a chance for people to try on a few roles for size, you know, help them maybe figure out their own sexuality. I mean, I think that's probably taking it a little deeper than it needs to go, but I think it has had a useful purpose in that way, and I've certainly had some very interesting and moving mail from people who have said, you know, thanks for helping me figure out who I was, you know, and that's very nice.
Did you ever go to one of like the midnight screenings back in the 70s and watch the movie with the people who were reciting along, and when they would make a toast on screen, people would like throw toast, you know, at the screen, and you know the whole bit. It became an incredibly participatory experience for the people who came to see it time and time again.
I did go. I went a couple of times. Oddly enough, it started happening at the Waverley Theatre
In Manhattan, in
on
the
6th
Village.
Avenue in the Village, and ironically, I was living a block behind it on Jones Street.
Oh, you're kidding.
So I would see on my way home all these people, and you know, I got to know about it rather quickly because I was a neighbor.
Wow.
And finally, I went to see it, and in fact, I had to sort of call the theatre because, you know, you could never get in. And I said, you know, I'm in it, and I'd really love to come and see it and get an eyeful. And the operator said, "You're the third Tim Curry to call this week." So finally, I showed up, and they sort of believed me and took me in, and the word spread rather swiftly, and people were sort of coming up and touching me and running away and giggling, and it was a very, very peculiar experience. And then finally the usherette, I don't know what you call them really, that's what they call them in England, came and sort of dragged me out of my seat and announced that I was an imposter and threw me out of the theatre, which is which is
Wow.
quite funny, really.
Did you protest?
So I actually had my passport on me, and I pulled it out, and I said, "Still think I'm an imposter?" And she said, "Oh, Mr. Curry, I'm so sorry. Please come back in." And I said, "I wouldn't dream of coming back in." And I saw it once. On the Strip in L.A. Because I was doing a gig there with my band when I was making records, and I took them up to the balcony to see it, and I remember my drummer coming out and saying, "We don't have to dress up like that, do we?" And I said, "No, you really don't, and I shan't be either." But it was odd. I mean, it's a very peculiar experience. I mean, the first person to actually shout back in the theatre was David Bowie's first wife, Angie.
Really?
I remember when Bowie came and he brought this huge entourage, and she was with him, and when Richard O'Brien was about to kill me, she shouted, "No, don't do it!" And so I guess she was one of the first people to sort of do that. And Mark Shaman, who's the sort of famous composer now, was one of the first to actually talk back in the Waverly. I think he began it here in New York, and now, of course, it's everywhere.
Tim Curry will be back in the second half of the show. He's now starring in the Monty Python musical Spamalot. It opens on Broadway Thursday. I'm Terry Gross, and this is Fresh Air.
How'd you do, I see you've met my faithful hand-in-hand. He's just a little brought down because when you knocked, he thought you were the candy man.
Don't get strung up by the way I look. Don't judge a book by its cover. I'm not much of a man by the light of day, but by night I'm one hell of a lover. I'm just a sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania. Let me show you a rhyme, maybe.
CDs and transcripts of Fresh Air are available from Burrell's at 1-877-213-7374. Support for Fresh Air comes from the David Bruce Smith Family Foundation, supporting humanitarian causes, and from the Ford Foundation, whose magazine reports on how arts education is being used to boost student achievement in Texas schools at fordfound.org. This is NPR, National Public Radio.
A song from the new Broadway musical Spamalot. Coming up, we continue our conversation with one of the show's stars, Tim Curry, and TV critic David Bianculli looks ahead to the new season of The Shield.
We're knights of the round table, we dance whenever we're able. We do routines and chorus scenes, the footwork impeccable. We dine well here in Camelot, we eat ham and jam and Spamalot. We're knights of the round table, our shows are for mid-able. But many times we're given rhymes that aren't quite unsingable. We're opera mad in Camelot, we sing from the diaphragm.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross, back with Tim Curry. He stars as King Arthur in the new musical Spamalot, based on the film Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It opens on Broadway Thursday. Curry became famous for his starring role in the Rocky Horror Picture Show as Dr. Frank-N-Furter. Recently, he's been in Kinsey and Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. He's also done voices for many animated films, including The Wild Thornberrys, in which he played Nigel Thornberry, an English animal lover who travels the world making nature documentaries with his family. Here he is out in the savannah talking with his daughter as he prepares to leave for a few days.
We'll be gone until after the eclipse. Will you be all right with Donnie?
Are you kidding? This will be the highlight of my young life.
That's the spirit, poodles.
Dad, have you completely lost your ability to recognize sarcasm?
I'm not sure I ever had it, Deborah. Now, stay close to camp. If you're lucky, you might see a hyena roving about.
Excuse me while I go find a container for my joy.
Very well, we'll wait right here. Oh, that's sarcasm, isn't it? You do that rather frequently, don't you?
Let's get back to our interview with Tim Curry. Now, your father was a chaplain in the British Navy.
Yes.
What did your parents think of your role in Rocky Horror?
Well, he, alas, was dead because he died when I was 12.
Oh.
So he wasn't even aware that I was an actor, even. I think my mother, my mother, who, you know, is really like one of those sort of Monty Python ladies, you know.
Oh, I can't imagine what's going on.
You know, who always had a hat. And since my first job in the theatre was hair and, you know...
And you were probably naked in that, right?
And I did appear naked in it. I think, you know, it was a relief to her that I actually was wearing clothes of any kind in
At least
in
you
the
were
Rocky Horror
covered
Show.
by a corset and garters.
She was happily unaware that that part of the character, particularly Frank-N-Furter, it is most gracious, was based on her.
In
was
what
actually-
way?
Well, it was sort of her telephone voice, you know. Do you have any tattoos, Brad? My sister, when she saw it, fell on the floor and said, you know, does she know? And I said, no, she has absolutely no idea, and please don't tell her. She thought it was very, very amusing and brought all her friends. So she was pretty hip lady, my mother, and she got it. I mean, you know, astonishingly. She loved it.
It's really
She didn't
funny.
like it as much as the Pirates of Penzance, which I did at Drury Lane, because the Queen Mother came to that, and that, you know, was the total seal of approval of my career.
And I would bet that the Queen Mother did not go to Hair or Rocky Horror.
I don't think she went to either, although Princess Margaret did come to Rocky Horror and had a wonderful time.
Really?
And so did Princess Diana, actually requested to meet me because she was such a Rocky Horror fan.
So did you ever meet Princess Diana?
I did actually meet Princess Diana. I was doing a production of Love for Love, and it was taken to Vienna for British Week, and we played at the Burgtheater, and Prince Charles and Princess Diana were the guests of honor, and which was when she said that she very much wanted to meet me, and so they sort of put me at the end of the receiving line, and Prince Charles said, I think I've seen you on television. Haven't I seen you on television? I said, yes, sir, I'm sure you've seen me on television. Yes, I thought I'd seen you on television. But Diana said, you were in the Rocky Horror Show. And I said, yes, ma'am, I was. And I was, but I'm sure that you haven't seen it. She said, oh, yes. She said, it quite completed my education. She was a very funny girl, and a very beautiful one, and sort of a very wicked smile came with that sentence. She was great fun, and the world is poorer without her.
My guest is Tim Curry, and he's now starring in the Broadway musical Spamalot, which is based on the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail. No, you know, in the sense of range that you have as an actor. Okay, your first movie is Rocky Horror. The most recent film I saw you in was Kinsey, in which so you've gone from being like in the corset to literally playing a stuffed shirt.
Yes, absolutely.
Because, you know, your character in
The irony
Kinsey,
of which.
yeah. Your character in Kinsey is the professor who opposes Kinsey's research. He opposes Kinsey's approach to teaching about sexuality. He doesn't want any of this to get any more funding, and he's a very kind of like formal and uptight person.
Well, he's the conservative opposition, really, and historically was the conservative opposition in Indiana, and I think the irony of casting me in the part was not lost on Bill Condon, who's an old friend, and wanted to do two things. One, let me fulfill a cherished ambition to actually get to play an American on film, because they don't, let you. And also, I think he wanted to sort of subvert. He wanted somebody who I think could find some kind of subtle, hopefully, comedy in the role, without undermining the conservative argument, which was a really interesting thing to do.
You've done a lot of animated films and television series. How did that become such a central part of your work?
Well, the animation thing happened kind of by accident. A very nice man called Gordon Hunt, who's the father of Helen Hunt, the actress, and a wonderful director, who was directing animated cartoons at Hanna-Barbera. And they were doing a series of Bible stories, and he wanted me to play the snake. So I played the snake and had a lot of fun. And I said, look, when the tour's over, I'm actually going to move to LA, and I'd love to do some more of this. And will you, at least audition me for things when you have them? And he did. He was very faithful, and he would just say, come in and read, and I'd come in and read, and I started doing a lot of animation and loving it. And the great thing about it, apart from just the fun of it, is that, if you're in Los Angeles, waiting for movies, it can get very dull. And you can just, show up to an animation studio, and you don't have to look good, you don't have to shave or anything, and, and you get to play all these people that you'd never, ever get to play in real life.
So what are some of the voices you've done for these animations?
Oh, all sorts of things. I did Captain Hook for Peter Pan and the Pirates. I did Nigel Thornberry for the Wild Thornberries. Nigel Thornberry is a sort of a rather eccentric English explorer. I do Professor Calamitous in a show called Jimmy Neutron, who's a terrible rip-off of Truman Capote, basically. He talks like that. He's very tiny. And I actually met Truman Capote at Studio 54, so I get to do him quite faithfully, really.
Have you done him? Did you ever do him to him?
I didn't ever do him to him, although I was actually offered that show about him, which I was foolish enough to turn down, and Robert Morse did so brilliantly. He was an extraordinary character, and at one point I was going to make a film of one of his sort of novellas, and that never happened.
My guest is Tim Curry. He's now starring in the Monty Python musical Spamalot, which opens on Broadway Thursday. More after a break. This is Fresh Air.
If you trust in your soul, keep your eyes on.
My guest is Tim Curry. He starred in the 1975 cult classic The Rocky Horror Picture Show and is now starring as King Arthur in the Monty Python musical Spamalot, which opens on Broadway Thursday. You grew up in England. Your father was a chaplain in the Navy. Were you religious when you were growing up?
Rather not. As preachers' kids tend not to be, my father was pretty chill about all of that. He wasn't... Methodism in England is a lot more relaxed than it is in the States. It's not as forbidding or as chilly. And he was a very liberal and very funny man. But, I did willy-nilly show up, to Sunday school morning and afternoon, and went to hear him preach when he was on shore, because he was quite often at sea. And I spent my childhood in sort of various sort of naval bases until he died when I was quite young, when I was 12. And we moved to South London, and I went to boarding school. But and I actually went to a school that was founded by John Wesley, I mean, who founded Methodism in, the school, I think, started in 1784 or something and was founded for the sons of Methodist ministers. So I went to a fairly kind of churchy school, which has also turned out to be very kind of relaxed and liberal, and I was a cheerful agnostic, really, from then on.
Still a cheerful agnostic?
Still a cheerful agnostic.
Did you have to go to church, and did you sing a lot in church?
Well, that was the great bonus, because the Methodist Church has a remarkable body of hymns, largely a great number of them by Charles Wesley. And so I sang in church from about, 6 or 7, and I was a real boy soprano for, until my voice changed.
It changed a lot, didn't it?
It did change quite a whole lot. I was very lucky because I had a great music teacher who sent away to Westminster Choral School for exercises when my voice started breaking, because, so often people with wonderful soprano voices end up with no mature singing voices at all. And I managed to make that transition happily. And it's funny, when I was doing, I don't know whether this is interesting, when we were doing Pirates of Penzance, I had my first singing lessons, really. The lady who was doing them said, we must work on your falsetto and get your range up. And I said, I don't have a falsetto. And she said, oh, nonsense, everyone has a falsetto. And I said, no, I really don't. And she made me find one. And she suddenly had this revelation one day, and she said, were you a boy soprano? And I said, yes, I was. And she said, you're in mourning for that sound, aren't you? And I realized that I was. I mean, it is of great sadness not to be able to make that extraordinary pure sound that you do make as a boy soprano.
That's actually really interesting, yeah.
It is. It's fascinating, isn't it? I think I just, cut off that alley.
But you kept singing, didn't you?
I kept singing, yes, absolutely.
So did you go to, like, the loud, gruff rock band kind of singing afterwards?
Well, no, actually, I mean, at 17 or 18, I was singing Lieder, and, I was singing sort of classical music, really. But then, I guess, the Beatles happened, and it was all over.
So what kind
That and Marlboro,
Marlboro cigarettes.
It's funny because I actually quit smoking a year ago, and it was fascinating because within 3 weeks, my voice went back up a tone and a half, and I remembered, and I heard the voice that I remembered myself singing in when I was 19 or 20.
Huh.
And it's very odd, and it's a great warning to anyone to stay away from the demon tobacco, stupid drug that it is.
No, I've read that you not only love Billie Holiday, but that you do Billie Holiday, and I wasn't sure whether that meant that you sing a lot of songs associated with her, or whether you can do a good Billie Holiday impression.
Well, both, I hope. I don't know. I did a film for television in England called Blue Money, where I played an impressionist, and I did a few singers. Including Billie Holiday. Who else did I do? I did Ray Charles, and I did Elvis, and I don't know. Yes, I do Billie Holiday. Whether you would want to hear it now, I sort of doubt.
Well, but you'd be wrong, because I'd love to hear it if you were game.
Them that's God shall give, them that's not shall lose. So the Bible says, and it still is news. Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own.
Oh, it's much too early in the morning for you.
Did her singing influence you a lot? Even though
hugely. I didn't listen to anybody else for about 2 years when I was 18. I was just, this awful, depressive teenager listening to Billie Holiday and wondering, which gloomy Sunday I was going to throw myself under a car.
Oh, yeah. Which
You know how it is.
Which period were you mostly listening to of her?
Mostly the really early stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I find the later stuff very,
Because you were singing in the later voice.
very unhappy.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the voice you were
Well, I'm
just doing.
singing in the
right?
later voice because, of course, I'm singing 8 times a week, and
Right.
I don't quite have the control over my voice that I do. Really, it doesn't actually sort of start to warm up until the evening. It's weird when you do a musical because you sing so hard and so regularly that your voice kind of goes into shock until it actually has to be produced for that evening.
Did you always know that you had that ability to mimic?
Yes, I think, you have it or you don't. Hank, Azaria, who is
Azaria,
in this show, is an absolutely dazzling mimic and do anybody. You sort of have an ear or you don't, I think. And I think, a lot of it has to do with amusing other children when you're young and, getting out of being hit.
Right. Was that effective for you?
I think it's effective for all childhood comedians. I think it's, the root of a great deal of comedy.
Well, one last question about Spamalot before we go.
Yes.
Is the song Spam, the Monty Python classic Spam, in the show?
Well, what spam?
Yeah.
It is as part of a whole other song called Knights of the Round Table, in which a giant tin of spam is actually produced and paraded around. Spam, the makers of Spam, of course, are over the moon and very, very thrilled by this whole development, and have actually brought out a special edition of Spam, which you can probably find at your local supermarket.
What luck.
I know. Who knew? Very, very special luncheon meat.
Well, Tim Curry, I wish you really good luck with Spamalot. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you very much indeed. My pleasure.
Tim Curry stars as King Arthur in the Monty Python musical Spamalot. It opens on Broadway Thursday. Here's another song from the forthcoming cast recording.
They're knights of the round table.
They dance whenever they're able.
Oh, they're knights.
Not days, but nights.
Not dawn, not dusk, not late afternoon, but nights.
Of the round table, 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 round table.
So try your luck in Camelot.
Run and luck in Camelot.
It doesn't suck in Camelot.